So it really matters how you built that sense of self, where you're going to feel potential shame.
Yes. At the
And in the
same
conditioned
time,
world, shame is not, I mean, there's such a thing as kind of pathological shame, where people are just ashamed all the time. But, you know, in a conditioned world, shame is sometimes necessary. There are things, you know, that we are ashamed of, more moral things, I'm thinking. And yet, all of that kind of plays around the deeper sense of who we are. You can be a second-rate musician and still be infinite awake being. Isn't that cool? You can be a first-rate musician and still be infinite awake being. And you can be a first-rate musician and be completely asleep to it. There's sort of the classic formulation of right view as looking at every experience of life in the light of suffering and ending suffering. You know, and when something is going on that's suffering, to know this is suffering. And to know that as, to some degree, intrinsic in life, and to some degree, optional. The suffering in life. It's built in as much as everything that is dear to us, we will become separate from. You know? But there's the end of suffering. There's the view. See how I can put this simply. There's a lot of suffering when one is coming from the sense of self. That is absolutely not necessary, not intrinsic to this being an embodied being. And so that view allows you in any experience potentially to wake up. And so my little phrase, there's nothing wrong here, is a kind of reformulation of right view, you could say. That when you drop nothing wrong here into a moment of suffering, it gets seen in a different light. It gets seen either as it's intrinsic to the nature of things and there's nobody here that's at fault. And the being that's struggling against it and feeling fault about it could actually relax and let there be nothing wrong. So something along those lines, right view. One can spend a whole lifetime. I mean, in a sense, right view is everything. It is, if you really get it to the core, that is awakening. But in any moment, to notice suffering and to see where the actual freedom is to not suffer is to orient your life to right view. It's where these classical Buddhist teachings are very helpful. Forgiving yourself, you're holding on to an idea of injury when you're not yourself. You know, if there's a screw up and you won't forgive yourself for it, it's like it's now become attached to your identity, your sense of self, and you can't dislodge that. And so, you know, the right view is that everything arises according to conditions. And if the conditions aren't really present for things to go well, they don't. And so the thing that you're not forgiving yourself for, you're saying in essence that you don't believe that things happen by causes and conditions. I, the absolute self, should have been able to do it right. I should have been wiser. I should have. Make all those sorts of statements as if the self were something absolute and all powerful, godlike. And it's not. It's really, wow, it's really something when you goof up and wisdom arises to see that that was just the confluence of causes and conditions. And when that happens, in the very next moment, you can respond more wholesomely. You're not bound by that unwholesome moment. When you take it on yourself, you create a burden and you can't respond very well. It's a little like, have you ever noticed the difference between, when you do something hurtful, and the difference between apologizing or trying to do something because you recognize you hurt someone versus trying to do something because it hurts your ego to see that you hurt someone. They're different. They're quite different. And, sometimes in the very apology, you can hear that someone's defending themselves. It's really about defending themselves. And it's not about saying what the person that's been hurt needs to hear, to have what they experience be acknowledged, and to leave yourself out of it. That can be a very telling moment. My sense of depression is it is a protected state. It's something we choose. And I use the word choose rather loosely, because I don't think it's a conscious choice. But it's something the intelligence of our inner system chooses or cooks up as a way to deal with a pain that's much rawer than the depression. Yes. So the depression shuts down our life energy. It shuts down our fire energy so that we feel less. It is a state of not feeling that feels particularly bad. So the movement out of depression often involves feeling more and letting the fire energy come back. Some way that we haven't let ourselves and our feelings matter enough to ourselves. Yeah. Some way we've kind of said silently to ourselves, oh, it doesn't matter. And we weren't being honest. Because it does matter. This being that you are, Jim, matters. And Your feelings matter. And so the pain is paradoxically the gateway to the end of suffering in this case. The avoidance of pain, the avoidance of heartbreak, kind of keeps you stuck in the pattern. And I know these can be really long-term patterns. This was set up, when you were quite small. And you can get really ensconced in that, and much of your identity can even be in it. So it's, I know this is not a small matter that I'm talking to you about, but that's kind of the essence of it, is the way out of the suffering of depression involves feeling more and feeling, it's really heartbreak. And witnessing yourself in that heartbreak and coming to love yourself in that heartbreak. Sometimes the heartbreak, people curve back around and they go back to I don't matter. You kind of touch the heartbreak, but something kind of bends it back into I don't matter, it doesn't matter, it's better not to feel. Rather than the heartbreak being the birth of love in yourself, for yourself. Yeah. And sometimes people spend, way too much time explaining their depression to themselves. And to some degree that can help with the shame, because there's a shame that goes with being depressed. And I really appreciate your willingness to say that you're depressed, because sometimes people kind of wear it like a badge of I'm not any good. And it doesn't mean that at all. It just means your system at some point long ago learned to protect itself this way. And other people's learn to protect themselves in other ways that aren't so helpful. Anxiety, addiction, if I need to name some, somatization. And those are the ones that get counted as mental illness. Just being mean to people. There's lots of ways that people go into protection mode. And so this is one that you have. And sometimes, I say sometimes people have a tendency for depression who worry about their fire energy hurting someone else. Yes. In the form of anger. And so they like sit on their fire energy in the idea that it somehow protects them and protects others from getting scorched. Yeah. Saying what matters. And standing there beside it, saying what you need and saying what matters. It's a bit of a paradox because, this Dharma stuff talks about no self, and yet we're actually supposed to show up for the being that we are in this body, in this life. It's a paradox. It's not one or the other. And so the sweet being of Jim needs you. Needs your witnessing, loving presence.